Okay. Whoop. Fix the microphone. There we go. We got the tambourine today. We got my holy jeans on. Oh my gosh, I have to fix myself because these jeans are so big. My mom hates these jeans, mind you, hates them. Shout out, Mom. But actually, I get a lot of compliments on these jeans. I would just like that to be known. We're going to see why the tambourine has anything to do with today's episode in a little bit. But otherwise, what's up, y'all? My name is Alyssa, and this is Too Good Not to Share, the podcast where we sip on Jesus tea and serve God winks. Alrighty. So, pulse check, real talk, where am I at? This is now the third time I have hit play, or record, I should say. So, there's that. I am in late stage luteal. 2 episodes back, I said that I was in ovulation. Well, now we're not. Now we're 3 takes in, late stage luteal. Lord, please help me get through this. So today I'm feeling ugly. I'm feeling puffy. I'm feeling like a lot more self-doubt, less confidence. There's less flow that's happening right now. I'm feeling a lot more critical, hence record number 3. I think it's important to talk about as a woman of God, and the reason I ever bring up, where am I at in my cycle? If you think that's weird, I pray that it doesn't sound weird one day. If there's something I think the world is getting right in the worldly space of health and, spirituality spaces and things, it's that they do talk about women's cycles. That's becoming normalized, and I really hope that in the church that becomes normalized too. Because God made us this way. We are hormonal creatures. We are cyclical creatures as women, and we get to honor where we're at in our cycle. So 2 episodes back, I was ovulating, feeling super excitable. And then today, I'm not. Today is kind of feeling like this weather. I'm feeling moody. I'm feeling a little down. I'm feeling irritable, critical. It's important because if we're going to be able to show up for ourselves and for others as women of God, while I'm not saying that your cycle should run your life because Jesus is at the center of my life, my cycle does inform how I show up, how I'm realistically going to be able to show up for myself and others, how I'm going to talk to myself and others, right? Whether I'm doing this show or I'm talking to someone in person, or I'm even hearing the self-talk in my head, it will impact us. So let's normalize that. And, the fact that women don't know that we have a follicular phase, or you might have never even heard of the word luteal phase, that's a problem. This is God's design as a woman that we bleed. And especially for those of us, I'm not on any hormonal birth control. I'm single and celibate. I'm a big advocate for women not being on hormonal birth control because I want them to know their bodies, the body that God gave them with all of its cycles and how that impacts them and their mood and all the things. And so I think that that's just a very important conversation that should be brought forward more. So I'm not afraid to talk about it, and it gives you a pulse check on where I'm at as your host for the day, as your online bestie for this moment. That's where I'm at. That's the truth. I'm not necessarily feeling my best right now, but I'm here and I'm showing up. Because as I heard today at church, what did she say? Anything with potential to grow has to be tended. I loved that. Was Pastor Andy Andrews. Shout out. I love me some Andy. She is so fire. I believe this podcast has potential to grow, so I must tend to it. With that being said, church this morning, this is maybe a word for somebody. I couldn't, and I promise we're going to get into the show here soon, the bulk of it. This is part of the show, but regardless, I had to watch church this morning from home on YouTube on the live because we had a tornado watch here in Charleston, and the wind was just really winding. Sometimes they close the bridges when that happens, and I just thought, I'm not playing that game. I have to do the podcast today. That's going to ruin my whole day if I get stuck and I can't get back home. I'm just going to watch it from home. My mom was also worried about me driving, all that stuff. So I made the decision to watch it from home, even though I was really bummed because Sunday's my favorite day. Love going to church, and I love Pastor Andy, and I knew she was preaching. But there's a grace. I still went to church. I still watched church. I still took notes. I still praised. I still prayed. I still stayed present. So maybe that's just a word for someone today. Give yourself grace if you have to watch church from home sometimes. While I think the best option is obviously in church fellowship, in-person fellowship, to be with community and fellow believers, there's just nothing like that if you find the right church. It's okay if you have to do online sometimes. But point two of that is actually show all the way up. Don't be like multitasking. If you were at church, would you be folding your laundry? No. So don't do that. Like, be present. Do everything else that you would normally do with church. Sing, worship, praise, pray, talk to Jesus, take notes, show up, be present. Okay? It's just another little side note of the day. So with all that being said, let's get into the bulk of today's show. So we're not going to actually start with a God wink today because, well, quite frankly, I didn't have some big God wink that I want to share, and I'm not going to force a God wink. That doesn't mean God wasn't speaking to me this week. He spoke through his word like different ways, but a specific God wink, like some synchronistic, serendipitous moment, nothing at the forefront of my mind coming to me. So I'm not going to force that. What I will share is a praise report because I do think that's encouraging. So praise report, I teach at a contrast therapy studio. As I mentioned before, it's called Mind Zero. Contrast therapy is sauna and cold plunge. And we do group-based classes, breath work throughout. And I got to teach this week to a group of women that were from the Seacoast Church leadership team, my church, and some of their, sorry for hitting that, some of their friends. And I just don't really have words for how impactful that was and how incredible it was. And I want to do that every single week. One of them said afterwards, it felt like heaven on earth. She said it so beautifully. Shout out Katie Walters. She said, we're so heaven-minded as believers that like we forget that we get to have a heaven on earth experience with Jesus. And since I was talking about how in class I said, reminder that the body, it says right here in scripture, is the temple of the Holy Spirit. And so we get to commune right here with the Lord. And so she said, this just felt like it was a reminder to bring, like, heaven gets to be on earth too with Jesus right here in the body. And she was just really grateful for that experience. And I was just like blown away by that comment. I was in tears. I mean, imagine being in 50-degree water, holding hands in a cold plunge pool, singing, on my best day, I'm a child of God, and worshiping to the song Glory by Seacoast Music. It was just like, I got teary-eyed, and several other women were in tears, and it was just worshiping in the sauna, like the furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It felt like the furnace. If you know that Bible story, just worshiping in 200 degrees, sweating profusely, and worshiping like he's here with you in those hard moments, in the uncomfortable moments, Jesus is there with you. It was just such a beautiful metaphor, and I want to do it all the time. How can I do that all the time? Can I open a Christian-based contrast therapy studio? I need like $1 million. Oh my gosh. Someone hit me up. That's an idea right there. Like, I need an angel investor. Okay. Anyway, that's my praise report. Just immense gratitude of that. Actually, Andy was in the class and she preached today at church. So again, shout out Andy. I love her preaching so very much. All right. Moving into the Jesus tea of the day of the class. We have so much to cover today, y'all. Like a lot. So we need to get into it. Episode number 5, Cinco. We've got several different Jesus tea that I want to sip on here. Here they are. Tests and trust. Miracles do not equate to faith. We so easily forget what he brought us out of and complain. Challenge your doubt and trust God's provision. And I have all of this really under the concept of what I'm calling the Manna Mindset, which comes before the Promised Land mindset. Okay, so buckle up. Let's do it. We're going to be reading a lot from chapter 16 today in Exodus. Where we've left off is they're at this Red Sea moment, right? God is moving. You can imagine the awe of the ocean literally pulling itself up on the sides. Imagine how powerful that wind, talk about winding. That wind was winding. And you might think, well, why were they afraid to walk through that? Like, why would they ever have thought about running back towards the Egyptians? Because they did. I mean, we like to think that we would, but also in reality, I mean, how scary was it probably that they saw this giant, like these waves? Imagine looking at that and being like, I'm supposed to walk through that? Am I going to be okay? It's like, you almost feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. If I go forward, I mean, am I really going to make it out? Or is the ocean, am I going to drown? Or I've got the Egyptian army behind me. You know, we like to think, why didn't they just run with like a wild abandon? I mean, that would have been scary. That would have been a bit scary, let's be honest. So anyway, they're going through. They're filled with awe. It says they get through. The water stood up on both sides. And verse 30 of chapter 14, that is how the Lord rescued Israel from the hand of the Egyptians that day. And the Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the seashore. When the people of Israel saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against the Egyptians, they were filled with awe before him. They put their faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So it's this moment of triumph. We have chapter 15 is all about a song of deliverance with Moses and the people of Israel. They are singing to the Lord. They are shouting his praises. This is where we get the tambourine comes into play, because it says in chapter 15, verse 20, then Miriam, the prophet, took a tambourine and led all the women, I love that, all the women, as they played their tambourines and danced. And Miriam sang this song. I love the visual of all the women of Israel like singing and dancing with a tambourine. And it just, I mean, I love to dance. If you know me, you know I love to dance. So I can just imagine that moment of pure joy and celebration of, look how the Lord saved us, delivered us. Look what he just did. He just moved the ocean and saved us. That is worthy of some tambourine and dance and singing. Woo! So they're saved from slavery, at least the physical slavery. Now this is where that manna mindset and removing themselves from slave mindset. Because you have to remember, they've gone through years, hundreds and hundreds of years of slavery. Like, they've lost count at this point, how long they've been enslaved. They have a slave mindset. So although they're physically no longer slaves, God has a lot of work to do on their mindset to sanctify them, to become more like him, so that they can walk in freedom. They can walk in a manna mindset, and then eventually they'll get to a promised land mindset, the land of milk and honey. Okay, so chapter 16, manna and quail from heaven. I want to read through a bunch of this. Like, literally, this is going to be more verbal of me literally reading the Bible. And we'll tie in all of the different Jesus tea and what we're sipping on as we go. So here we go. If you got your Bible, grab it out. Or if you got the Holy Bible app, grab that. This is chapter 16, Exodus. Keep in mind, this is only 1 month out of Egypt. 1 month. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin. So they're in the wilderness, between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There too, the whole community of Israel, keyword, complained about Moses and Aaron. If only, here they go again, if only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. Does this sound familiar? This is 1 month out. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted, but now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. Then the Lord said to Moses, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day the people can go out and pick as much food as they need for that day. Key phrase, I will test them. This is our test and trust. So God does test us. He doesn't tempt. That's the enemy. That's Satan. He tests, though. I will test them to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they will gather food, and then when they prepare it, there will be twice as much as usual. There's a point for that, you'll see. So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, by evening you will realize it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Remember that phrase 56 times. In the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard, he hears you, your complaints, which are against him. not against us. Woohoo! What have we done that you should complain about us?" Then Moses added, "The Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning, for he has heard your complaints. What have we done? Yes, your complaints are against the Lord, not against us." Oof, that's convicting even of itself right there. Let's jump down to verse 13. That evening, vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp. And the next morning, the area around the camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance as fine as frost blanketed the ground. The Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. "What is it?" they asked. They had no idea what it was. And Moses told them, "It is the food the Lord has given you to eat. These are the Lord's instructions. Each household should gather as much as it needs. Pick up 2 quarts for each person in your tent." So they still have to do work to do this, right? To get it. So the people of Israel did as they were told. Some gathered a lot, some only a little, but when everyone measured out, everyone had just enough. Those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. Then Moses told them, this is important, "Do not keep any of it, the food, until morning." But some of them didn't listen and kept it until morning. But by then, it was full of maggots and had a terrible smell. Moses was very angry with them. So that shows us they were not trusting. It's like us. When we hoard because we don't think God's going to provide in the future. We think, oh, he provided in this moment, but what about the future? We're not in trust. After this, the people gathered the food morning by morning, and as the sun became hot, the flakes they had not picked up melted and disappeared. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much as usual. Then all the leaders of the community came and asked Moses for an explanation. He told them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow will be a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath set apart for the Lord. So bake or boil as much as you want today, and set aside what is left for tomorrow." So they put some aside until tomorrow morning, just as Moses had commanded. And in the morning, the leftover food was wholesome and no maggots. So no maggots this time, no odor, because they listened to the directions, right? They were told, do twice as much so that for this day of the Sabbath, you won't have to work. You will have enough that day. Just listen to what I'm saying. Moses said, "Eat this food today, for today is a Sabbath day dedicated to the Lord. There will be no food on the ground today. You may gather the food for 6 days, but the 7th day is the Sabbath. There will be no food on the ground that day, because that's the day I've already provided enough for you. You need to trust me." But some of the people went out anyway on the 7th day, but they found no food. Shocker. The Lord asked Moses, "How long will these people refuse to obey my commands and instructions?" Dang. They must realize that the Sabbath is the Lord's gift to you, that is why he gives you a 2-day supply on the 6th day, so there will be enough for 2 days. The Israelites, jumping down to verse 31, called the food manna. It was white like coriander seed, and it tasted like honey wafers. Then Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Fill a 2-quart container with manna to preserve it for your descendants. Then later generations will be able to see the food I gave you in the wilderness when I set you free from Egypt." Jumping down to verse 35. So the people of Israel ate manna for 40 years. 40, until they arrived at the land where they would settle. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan, which is the promised land. So, what does all of this mean? Wow, let's unpack this. Imagine eating the same thing for 40 years. Wow. But that was of their own doing because God had to work on them for 40 years. We're going to unpack more of that as the story continues. Like, why did it have to be 40 years? It should not have been 40 years. Like, spoiler alert, if you don't know, they had no business in taking that long. It should not have taken 40 years. But because of their constant disobedience and the amount of character development that they needed to walk out their faith and actually trust the Lord, it took way longer than it needed to. Don't that preach to somebody? Like, it is our own disobedience. It is our own lack of trust and faith that is delaying, most likely, a lot of our blessings, because God is not going to give you something that you are not ready for. Because if you are still operating from, as I said, if they were still operating from the slave mindset, they would never have been able to fully receive the promised land mindset. They would never have been able to get there. We are no different. They had to move into the manna mindset. The manna mindset had to come before the promised land mindset. They had to go through the tests. They had to, as I put it, the tests and the trust. It says right there in verse 4, I will test them to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. God is not playing. He is not making it unclear. He's telling Moses, I'm testing them. Test this. This is a check. Like, are you actually going to listen to me, or are you going to still fool around? And I'm not saying that like meanly. God isn't doing it meanly. God isn't doing it because he doesn't want more for you. He's doing it because he wants more for you. He's doing it because he knows you need more time. You're not there yet. You're not ready. You don't want to receive a blessing that you are not capable of stewarding well, because it might destroy you, or you will destroy it and it will just fall through, or it may end up even hurting you. That's where we have free will, but like, we want to be ready for what God has for us. And so in God's kindness and mercy, he will give us more time for character development. And in the Israelites' case, that took 40 years of them unlearning the slave mindset so that they could get into the manna mindset. The manna mindset being before the promised land mindset, because the manna mindset was them learning to have faith in God. You have to build up faith to get to the point eventually of trust. It's like these people, they didn't actually know God as well as they thought. Their faith was not as strong as they thought. Therefore, they didn't actually trust him. And it took 40 years of God showing them, you can have faith in me. You can trust me. So the faith came before the trust of the promised land. They had to walk in that manna mindset. Do you see that? To know that the manna, literally the food, the provision that God provided, it just fell from the sky for 40 years. They had manna. He provided for 40 years. Talk about it. First of all, one of my Jesus teas was, we so easily forget what he brought us out of, and that miracles do not equate to faith. This is 1 month out that they're complaining already, that they're so hungry. We'd have been better off dead or just slaves in Egypt. Still operating from slave mindset, not manna mindset that says, I'm learning to have faith in God, that he provides in ways, even if they're unexpected ways, like this miraculous food from heaven that falls out of the sky and evaporates every morning after the dew is gone, but that sustains me. We so easily forget what he brought us out of. 1 month in, and they're forgetting he just opened up the seas for them to walk through, because miracles don't equate to faith. Jesus could show, and he did in the gospel, he shows all of these people miracle after miracle, and yet they still don't believe he is who he says he is, God incarnate, because miracles don't equate to faith. Faith is that which is unseen, believing in that which is unseen. And so when you have that manna mindset, it's about your faith. It's about building your faith. And in this case, very much about God's provision concerning the faith, so that by the time you get to the promised land, now you can shift into, I trust God. This isn't just me building up my faith anymore. Like, I trust the Lord. I am in a promised land mindset now. Doesn't mean that we always stay in a promised land mindset. I think sometimes that does waver, but we can catch ourselves, and we can always go back to at least that manna mindset of knowing, when has he provided for me before? Remember that time? Oh yeah, remember that time he opened up the seas? Remember that time he provided that check? Remember that time I got a bigger refund than I thought? That's that manna mindset of constantly going back and remembering when he's come through for you. And that's going to build up your faith, and therefore get you to the point of full trust in the Lord with that promised land people mindset of milk and honey. So maybe, is God testing you right now? Is God providing for you in ways that you might not even realize. What's your manna? I'll give you an example. I love that at the end of the chapter, it says that they ate it for 40 years until they came to the border of the land of Canaan, and then the manna, it stopped. I have a very real life example of this. I had a season where I got to learn the manna mindset. Before I ever got back to Charleston, God basically kicked me out of Charleston. He knew I needed to go 2 hours north, and I had to go. He just knew I had to go. I had to go be around the people that I met, the small group that I met, the smaller church that I was at. He knew better than I did, of course, even though I kicked and screamed my way out of Charleston. But I eventually got back here. He delivered me back here to Charleston, and which for me felt like my promised land moment. But it was after that season of learning, of unlearning the slave mindset and learning the manna mindset, learning that I could have faith in the Lord and building up my trust. And he showed it to me by, even though I had let go of my entire career, 6 figures in the New Age world, walked away, was broke as a joke, had to move back home, fell into depression, suicidal ideation. My boyfriend broke up with me. It was just awful. But I learned his provision. I learned his manna. I let go of all the slave mindset, the chains that I had from my life before Jesus, the self-centeredness, the ego, the pride, all of that. And I found a manna mindset of his provision. I found that he did provide me with a home I had a roof over my head. My parents were able to be there for me. He provided me a community of people. That's provision. Those people literally felt like provision for me. They gave me life in a very difficult season. They helped give me hope. That was provision to me. That was support. How is God supporting you? He also showed up for me in that I had a nanny job. I got a nanny job so I could pay my bills. The first podcasting editing gig that I pitched myself for on Upwork, this freelance website, I got it. I applied for so many other podcast editing gigs after that, didn't get them, but the very first one I got, and it was the highest paying one. And I kept that job for 1.5 years, that side gig. So with nannying, I had just enough to cover my bills. Just like this manna. He said, I got you for this season. It's just a season. For me, it was a year. And that was like my wilderness moment. Up 2 hours north outside of Charleston. It was my wilderness. But he provided exactly what I needed. Just like this. No more, no less than what I needed. Just like the Israelites had no more, no less of what they needed. And he even told them, when you do disobey and when you do try to save leftovers, it's going to become maggots. Trust me. We're building your faith up. This is your manna mindset we're working on so that you can get back to the promised land. Yeah? Do you see? This is a real life example. I've lived this. And by the time I moved back to Charleston, guess what? I got a new job. So I obviously stopped nannying, got a full-time job with Mind Zero, got promoted totally out of the blue within only a couple months of working there. And here's the kicker. Even that little side gig job that I had with podcast editing for this awesome podcast, guess what? Top of the year, this podcast told me, hey, we actually decided to give that gig now to someone within our company. We're not going to contract it out. And I remember thinking, the manna stopped. The manna stopped. Because it's just like the Israelites. He wanted me to know, girl, daughter, I brought you into the promised land. Like, you're good now. You don't need this manna anymore. You can start to walk in that promised land. Walk in the promise that I have promised you. I have delivered you into. Gosh, do you see that? Like, how good is that? Like, praise God. I was sad about it for a moment. Like, oh my gosh, I just lost that paycheck. And that was a nice side gig. It didn't take a couple hours a week. Like, I was fine doing it with my full-time job. And he was just like, no, you don't need that manna anymore. That is a part of a different season of life. That was part of the wilderness. Nope. We're working on promised land mindset now, babe. No, ma'am. Snip. Gone. And when people asked me if I was going to go look for another side job, I was like, I thought about it, but no. He is making it very clear. I'm okay. trust him because I've got my manna mindset. I know he's got my back. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be just fine. I'm just fine. I'm good. I know because he has provided and he will do it again. My manna mindset taught me that. My years in the wilderness, my year there, it taught me that. So I can take that into the promised land in this season of life and go, yep, I'm good. He got me. I trust him. It's not going to say like every day it's always like so firm in that. It can be hard sometimes, but my season in the wilderness, my manna mindset helped prepare me for that promised land moment. Challenge your doubt by looking at the times in your life when God has provided manna, when he has showed up for you with that check or that sudden windfall of money or that person who walked into your life that you really needed, or somehow that God provided in a way that you were just like, oh my gosh, he really did show up. That came out of nowhere. Challenge your doubt by looking at the manna that God has provided for you at different times in your life. Look at how he has showed up for you again and again and again, so that in those moments when we seem to forget and we want to just complain and worry like the Israelites, no, child. He's got you in the palm of his hand, right? That song we sang today at church. I trust in God. You get there. You get there because you know what he's brought you out of. All right, my friends. That was a bit of a longer one. We did a lot of reading with that. I hope that blessed you. The word is such a blessing. I thank you so much for listening to this show, for, like I said at the top of it, anything with potential to grow has to be tended. Thank you for being a part of this growth and this journey of figuring this out and me acting in obedience to do what I believe he's telling me to do, which is this podcast. It means the world to me that you listen, that you show up, and that you share. I hope that you have a gorgeous rest of your day. This was too good not to share.